before memory, before names, before stories were spoken aloud. There was a world shaped by cold. Ice covered the land in slow, patient silence. Not all at once and not forever, but long enough that generations were born, lived, and vanished beneath its quiet weight. Snow did not fall in storms as we imagine them today. It arrived softly, layer upon layer, season after season, until the ground itself seemed to forget warmth. This was Ice Age Earth, a planet breathing slowly, expanding and contracting, cooling and warming over tens of thousands of years, the kind of time that does not rush, the kind of time that reshapes continents without being noticed. The sun still rose each day, though it felt distant. Pale light stretched across frozen plains and shattered against walls of ice that stood higher than mountains. Glaciers moved so slowly they appeared still, yet they crept forward all the same, grinding stone into dust, carving valleys that would one day hold rivers. Wind passed over the land with nothing to stop it. No forests in many regions, no cities, only open space, frozen soil, and the sound of air moving endlessly across the earth. At night, temperatures fell deeper and the sky revealed stars untouched by smoke or light. The heavens were sharp and clear, as if closer than they are now. This was not a dead world, it was simply quiet. Life adapted to the cold. Grass grew low and tough, hugging the ground to survive. Moss clung to stone. In some places, tundra stretched farther than the eye could see, a landscape both empty and full at the same time. And moving across this land were shapes, large shapes, slow shapes. Mammoths walked in steady lines, their massive bodies covered in thick hair, their breath rising like smoke in the cold air. Each step pressed into snow that would remain untouched long after they passed. They moved with memory and instinct, following routes carved not into maps, but into generations. Predators followed at a distance, silent, patient, watching. And somewhere, far smaller, far quieter, were humans, not yet builders, not yet farmers, not rulers of anything. They were simply people trying to live. They felt the cold in their bones. They learned how to make fire last through long nights. They listened to the wind, read tracks in snow, and waited. Much of their lives passed in silence, broken only by the crackle of flame or the sound of footsteps over frozen ground. Time during the Ice Age did not feel urgent. Days blended into seasons, seasons into lifetimes. Survival was not dramatic. It was repetitive. Wake, move, gather, wait, sleep, and repeat. This world existed not for a few years or even a few centuries, but for tens of thousands of years. The Ice Age was not a single frozen moment. It was an era, a long chapter in Earth's history, written slowly in ice and stone. Ice sheets spread from the poles, covering much of the northern world. Sea levels dropped, revealing land, bridges where oceans now lie. Continents connected. Animals crossed where water would later return. Humans followed those paths without knowing they would one day disappear. The earth itself was different. Coastlines extended outward. The shape of the world shifted, though no one alive could see it happen. It was too slow, too quiet. And yet everything depended on these changes. Cold-shaped bodies, cold-shaped behavior, cold-shaped memory. The Ice Age was not cruel, it was indifferent. It offered no comfort, but no malice either. It rewarded patience, awareness, and cooperation. Those who learned its rhythms endured. Those who did not faded into the snow. In this frozen world, life learned balance. Mammoths grazed carefully, never stripping land bare. Predators hunted with precision, conserving energy. Humans shared food, warmth, and knowledge, passing lessons through gesture, story, and repetition. Nothing was wasted. Nothing could be. And above it all, ice watched silently. This story is not about heroes or victories. It is about coexistence, about humans living as one small part of a vast system shaped by cold, time, and movement. A world where survival was quiet and uncelebrated, and every sunrise was enough. As you listen, allow the pace to slow. Let the sounds of wind and snow settle in your thoughts. Imagine a world without clocks, without borders, without noise. A world where time moved differently, and rest came naturally with the dark. If you find comfort in these slow histories, you are gently welcome to rest here again. Archive of Rest is a place for stories told softly, for nights when the mind seeks calm more than answers. There is nothing you need to do now, nothing to remember, nothing to decide. Just listen. In the chapters ahead, we will move carefully through this frozen age. We will walk across icebound landscapes, observe the animals that thrived there, and sit quietly beside early human fires as the cold presses in from all sides. We will watch the Ice Age change, not suddenly, but gradually, as all things do. For now, remain here at the beginning, in the stillness, in the cold, on a planet shaped by ice, and let time move slowly once more. When people speak of the Ice Age, they often imagine a single frozen moment, a world locked in ice, endless snow, permanent winter. But the Ice Age was not one long winter, and it was not a sudden event. It was something slower, broader, more patient. The Ice Age was a rhythm. It unfolded over vast spans of time, shaped by patterns that repeated again and again. Cold advanced, then retreated. Ice spread across continents, then slowly pulled back. Warmth returned, only to fade once more. These cycles did not happen within a human lifetime, or even within many lifetimes. They moved on a scale so large that change felt invisible to those living inside it. To understand the Ice Age, it helps to release the idea of a single frozen world, and instead imagine a breathing planet, one that cooled and warmed, expanded and contracted, following rules written into Earth itself. The period we call the Ice Age is more accurately known as the Pleistocene epoch. It began around 2.5 million years ago and lasted until roughly 11,000 years ago. During this time, Earth experienced repeated glacial cycles. Long stretches of cold, called glacial periods, were interrupted by shorter, warmer intervals known as interglacials. We live in one of those warmer intervals now. During the coldest phases, massive ice sheets formed near the poles and slowly advanced outward. These were not thin layers of ice. They were vast, heavy bodies of frozen water, thousands of feet thick in places. They covered much of North America, northern Europe, and parts of Asia. Their weight pressed down on the land beneath them, reshaping the surface of the planet. Yet, even at the height of the Ice Age, not all of Earth was frozen. Large regions remained ice-free. Grasslands stretched across parts of Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Deserts existed alongside tundra. Forests survived in sheltered areas. The Ice Age was uneven, complex, and varied. Cold dominated, but it did not erase diversity. The driving force behind these cycles lay far beyond human awareness. Changes in Earth's orbit and tilt subtly altered how sunlight reached the planet. Over tens of thousands of years, these small shifts accumulated, cooling the climate enough for snow to linger through summers. When snow remained, it reflected sunlight rather than absorbing it, reinforcing the cold. Ice grew not because winters were harsher, but because summers were too weak to melt what had fallen before. This is how ice advances, quietly, patiently, year after year. As glaciers formed, they did not surge forward like waves. They moved at a pace measured in inches per day, sometimes less. Yet their mass gave them immense power. They scraped across bedrock, grinding mountains down and carrying stone with them. When they finally melted, they left behind valleys, lakes, and scattered debris that still shape the landscape today. Rivers changed course, coastlines shifted. Entire regions rose or sank under the weight of ice. Sea levels fell as water became locked in glaciers. Oceans retreated from shorelines, exposing land that had once been submerged. These newly revealed areas became corridors for movement. Animals crossed them. Humans followed, unaware that these paths would one day disappear beneath rising seas. Time during the Ice Age did not move in sharp lines. It drifted. A single glacial cycle could last tens of thousands of years. A cold phase might endure for generations beyond counting. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, temperatures would rise. Ice would thin. Glaciers would pause, then retreat. Life would adjust again. These transitions were not sudden disasters. There were no clear beginnings or endings. For those living through them, change was gradual enough to be absorbed into daily life. The Ice Age was not a constant blizzard. Much of the cold was dry. Snowfall in some regions was light, carried by wind rather than storms. The ground could be frozen and barren with little precipitation. In these areas, vast grasslands known as steppe tundra formed. They supported large grazing animals, whose movements shaped the land as much as the ice itself. This environment favored size. Larger bodies retained heat better. Thick fur and layers of fat offered insulation. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, bison, and other megafauna thrived in these conditions. Their presence was not an exception. It was the result of long adaptation. The Ice Age selected for patience. Smaller animals adapted too. Some burrowed. Some changed coats with the seasons. Some migrated as conditions shifted. Life did not fight the cold. It adjusted to it. Humans, arriving relatively late in the Ice Age story, did the same. They did not arrive to conquer ice or tame it. They arrived as participants in an already balanced system. Their tools were simple. Their knowledge came from observation. Their survival depended on understanding cycles rather than resisting them. Fire was not a symbol of dominance. It was a necessity. Clothing was not decoration. It was protection. Shelter was temporary, responsive to movement of animals and seasons. The Ice Age demanded flexibility. What often gets overlooked is how stable the Ice Age actually was. Within each cold phase, conditions could remain consistent for thousands of years. Generations were born into the same climate their ancestors had known. The world felt permanent, even as it slowly changed. This stability allowed cultures, behaviors, and traditions to develop. It allowed animals to establish migration routes. It allowed ecosystems to settle into equilibrium. The danger did not lie in the cold itself, but in rapid change. When warming came, it altered landscapes quickly. Ice melted, sea levels rose, forests spread into grasslands. Animals lost habitats they had depended on for millennia. Humans were forced to adapt again, often within a much shorter span of time. In this way, the Ice Age was not defined by cold alone, but by contrast. by the tension between long stability and gradual transformation. The term Ice Age can be misleading because it suggests a single frozen era. In truth, Earth has experienced multiple ice ages throughout its history. The one we are most familiar with is simply the most recent. It is the one humans remember, because it overlaps with human existence. Earlier, ice ages came and went long before humans appeared. Future ones may return long after current civilizations have faded. This perspective changes how we view the Ice Age. It was not a rare catastrophe. It was a natural state of Earth, one that has occurred repeatedly. Warm periods like our own are, in geological terms, brief pauses between longer stretches of cold. The Ice Age was Earth's default rhythm, not an anomaly. Understanding this reframes the story. Humans did not emerge despite the Ice Age. They emerged within it. Their adaptability, cooperation, and awareness were shaped by living in a world where resources were limited and change was slow but inevitable. The Ice Age taught patience because it allowed no other option. There were no quick solutions, no shortcuts. Survival came from repetition, from memory, from passing knowledge quietly from one generation to the next. Where to find shelter, when animals would return, how long winter would last. Time was not measured in hours or days, but in seasons and migrations. The Ice Age also blurred boundaries. With lower sea levels, continents felt closer. What are now distant lands were once connected by open ground. Movement across these spaces did not feel like exploration. It felt natural, necessary. People followed animals. Animals followed grass. Grass followed climate. Everything was linked. When we look back at the Ice Age now, it can feel distant and unreal, a world too harsh to imagine. But for those who lived within it, it was simply home. It was the only world they knew. Its rules were learned early and reinforced daily. Cold was not feared as an enemy. It was respected as a constant. This chapter of Earth's history was written without urgency. It did not rush toward an ending. It unfolded slowly, allowing life to find its place again and again. To understand the Ice Age is not to imagine endless snow, but to recognize a world governed by time on a scale far larger than ourselves. A world where change came quietly, where survival was ordinary, and where patience shaped everything that lived. As we move forward, we will step into that world more fully. We will walk across its frozen landscapes and observe the lives shaped by its rhythms. But first, it is enough to remember this. The Ice Age was not a moment. It was a way of being. The Ice Age landscape did not announce itself with sudden drama. It revealed itself slowly through distance, silence, and scale. To stand within it was not to feel overwhelmed in a single moment, but to sense a vastness that extended in every direction, unchanged by urgency or noise. This was a world shaped by cold, but not defined by emptiness. Ice lay at the heart of it all. In the northern reaches, glaciers stretched across the land like sleeping giants. Their surfaces were pale and uneven, marked by ridges, cracks, and long frozen waves where snow had compacted over centuries. These ice sheets did not sparkle or shimmer. They absorbed sound. They muted the world. A glacier did not feel alive, yet it was always moving. Slowly, almost imperceptibly. It crept forward under its own weight, pressing down on the land beneath it, reshaping hills into plains and carving valleys where rivers would one day flow. Standing nearby, nothing appeared to change. Returning years later, the ground itself felt altered. The cold air carried little moisture. In many regions, snowfall was light. Wind swept across frozen ground, lifting fine grains of snow and ice into the air, carrying them across long distances. The result was not deep, soft snow, but a hard surface, packed tight, shaped by constant motion. Beyond the glaciers lay open land. Vast stretches of steppe tundra extended across continents uninterrupted by trees. Grass grew low and resilient, its roots gripping frozen soil. These grasses bent under wind but did not break. They were tough, nutrient-rich, and essential to life in this cold world. The horizon often felt endless. Without forests or structures, distance lost meaning. A herd of animals could appear close only to remain hours away. Landmarks were subtle. A rise in the ground, a line of darker soil, a cluster of stones exposed by wind. Sound traveled far in this open space. Footsteps crunched sharply. The call of an animal echoed longer than expected. At times the wind was the only sound, steady and unchanging, moving across the land like breath. The sky played an important role in shaping the experience of the Ice Age. During the day, light was pale and diffused, filtered through cold air. The sun rarely felt warm, even when it stood high. Shadows were soft and stretched long across the ground. At night, the sky cleared completely. Stars filled the darkness with sharp clarity. With no smoke, no artificial light, no haze, the heavens felt close enough to touch. The moon cast a faint glow across ice and snow, enough to reveal shapes and movement. In this landscape, seasons existed, but they were muted. Summers were brief and cool. They did not melt ice sheets, only softened the surface slightly. Winters were long, but not always violent. Often they were still, marked more by absence than by storms. Cold settled into everything. Rivers flowed differently during the Ice Age. In warmer months, meltwater from glaciers fed streams that cut through the land. These rivers were braided and shallow, shifting their paths from year to year. In winter, they froze solid, becoming silent corridors across the plains. Lakes formed where ice blocked drainage, or where glaciers carved deep basins. Some were temporary, appearing and disappearing with changing temperatures. Others persisted for thousands of years, reflecting pale skies and distant ice walls. The coastlines of the Ice Age world bore little resemblance to those we know today. With sea levels far lower, land extended outward into what are now shallow seas. Wide coastal plains existed where waves would later return. These areas were often windswept and cold, but they offered routes for movement and migration. One such feature was the land bridge between Asia and North America. It was not a narrow strip, but a broad region of grassland and tundra. Animals crossed it gradually, following food and seasonal patterns. Humans did the same, unaware that the ocean would one day reclaim the land beneath their feet. Inland, the ground itself bore the marks of freezing and thawing. Permafrost lay beneath the surface in many regions, locking soil and stone together. In warmer periods, the upper layers softened just enough to allow plants to grow. In colder times, everything hardened again. This cycle shaped the land into subtle patterns, polygons of cracked earth, mounds formed by expanding ice beneath the soil, stones slowly rising to the surface as freezing pushed them upward over time. Nothing in this landscape was random. Every feature reflected a balance between cold, movement, and time. Despite the harshness, life found ways to persist. Lichens spread across exposed rock. Moss grew where moisture collected. Low shrubs clung to sheltered areas, offering protection from wind. In certain regions, scattered trees survived, twisted and stunted, shaped by constant exposure. Animals moved through this world with familiarity. Their paths were etched into memory rather than ground. Migration routes followed rivers, coastlines, and seasonal grass growth. These routes could remain unchanged for thousands of years. Herds traveled slowly, conserving energy. They paused to graze, to rest, to wait for others. Movement was deliberate. Wasteful motion meant lost warmth, lost strength. Predators understood the land as well. They used subtle changes in terrain to approach prey. A slight rise offered cover. A frozen river allowed silent movement. Every feature mattered. For humans, the frozen landscape demanded attention. Survival depended on reading signs that were easy to miss. The direction of wind, the hardness of snow, the presence or absence of animal tracks. Shelter was chosen carefully. A shallow depression offered protection from wind. A rock outcrop provided a barrier. Temporary structures were built where needed and abandoned when conditions changed. Nothing was permanent. Fire transformed the experience of this world. A small flame created a pocket of warmth and light, pushing back the cold just enough to allow rest. Smoke rose straight into still air or bent sharply under strong winds, revealing shifts in weather. The frozen landscape shaped human movement. People followed animals, and animals followed grass. Camps shifted with the seasons. Familiar places were revisited again and again, forming a mental map passed through memory and story. Yet, for all this movement, there was also stillness. There were moments when nothing stirred, when wind paused, when animals rested, when humans sat quietly, conserving energy. In those moments, the Ice Age revealed its deeper nature. It was not loud, it was not chaotic, it was restrained. The cold imposed limits, and within those limits life found balance. Storms did occur, but they were not constant. Snowstorms could obscure the land, blending sky and ground into a single pale surface. Orientation became difficult. Movement slowed or stopped entirely. People and animals waited until visibility returned. Ice storms coated surfaces in glassy layers, making travel dangerous. These events were remembered not as spectacles, but as disruptions. They reinforced the need for caution and patience. As glaciers advanced and retreated, they created barriers and corridors. Valleys filled with ice became impassable. New routes opened as ice thinned. The landscape was never static, but its changes were gradual enough to be absorbed into tradition. Generations grew up knowing the same hills, the same rivers, the same seasonal patterns. Change was recognized only in hindsight. One of the defining qualities of the Ice Age landscape was scale. Distances were vast. Time felt stretched. Without markers of progress or urgency, days blended together. Movement across land was slow and deliberate. This environment shaped perception. It encouraged observation rather than action, waiting rather than forcing. Those who rushed wasted energy. Those who watched endured. The frozen landscape also carried memory. Bones lay preserved in ice and soil, untouched for centuries. Tracks, frozen into mud, hardened into stone. Tools lost or discarded remained where they fell. In this way, the land became an archive of life that passed through it, a quiet record written in layers of sediment and ice. As temperatures fluctuated, the landscape responded. Grasslands expanded during warmer phases. Ice retreated slightly. Rivers grew stronger. During colder phases, ice advanced again, reclaiming ground and altering routes. These changes were not disasters. They were transitions. Life adjusted as it always had. To imagine this world fully is to let go of modern expectations. There were no sharp contrasts between safe and dangerous, productive and empty. Everything existed along a spectrum shaped by cold. Even the color palette was subdued. Whites and pale blues dominated ice and snow. Browns and muted greens marked grasslands. The sky shifted from pale gray to deep blue. Color existed, but quietly. At dawn and dusk, light stretched across the land in long, gentle gradients. These moments were not dramatic. They were subtle, easy to miss. Yet they framed daily life. The frozen landscape did not invite conquest or transformation. It invited coexistence. Those who lived within it learned to move with it, not against it. This was a world where patience mattered more than strength, where memory mattered more than speed, where survival came not from changing the land, but from understanding it. As we move deeper into this Ice Age world, we will begin to notice the lives that filled these spaces, the animals whose bodies and behaviors were shaped by cold, the humans who learned to live quietly alongside them. For now, it is enough to remain within the landscape itself, wide, silent, frozen, a world defined not by struggle alone, but by balance, restraint, and time. The Ice Age was not empty. It was alive with movement. Across frozen plains, along river valleys, and through wind-swept grasslands, animals shaped the rhythm of the world. They did not hurry. They did not waste energy. Every movement, every pause, every breath carried meaning in a landscape where survival depended on balance. These animals were not monsters of a lost world. They were not oversized curiosities. They were ordinary creatures, perfectly adapted to the conditions that surrounded them. Their size, their fur, their behavior, all of it reflected long adjustment to cold, wind, and scarcity. The Ice Age favored those who endured. Among the most familiar figures of this frozen world was the woolly mammoth. Mammoths did not dominate the landscape through aggression. They moved with quiet authority, their massive bodies insulated by thick layers of fat and long, coarse hair. Beneath that outer coat lay a dense underlayer, trapping warmth close to the skin. Their ears were small, reducing heat loss. Their tails were short. Even their blood vessels were arranged to conserve warmth. Every feature reflected thousands of generations shaped by cold. Mammoths traveled in herds, often led by older females who carried memory rather than force. These leaders remembered migration routes, seasonal grazing grounds, and safe passages across rivers and ice. The herd moved together, protecting the young at the center. Their pace was steady. They grazed on tough grasses, sedges, and low shrubs, using their curved tusks to sweep away snow and expose food beneath. These movements altered the land. By breaking ice crusts and compacting snow, mammoths allowed grasses to grow more easily, supporting other animals in their wake. In this way, mammoths were not just inhabitants of the Ice Age landscape, they were architects of it. Nearby, herds of steppe bison moved across open plains. Smaller than mammoths, but still imposing, these animals traveled in large groups, their thick coats shedding snow and wind. They were well adapted to long migrations, able to cover great distances in search of grazing. Bison followed the rhythm of the seasons closely. When grass grew sparse in one area, they moved on. Their hooves churned soil, spreading seeds and nutrients. Their presence shaped the grasslands just as mammoths did, maintaining open environments that supported diverse life. Woolly rhinoceroses roamed some of the same regions. Their bodies were compact and powerful, covered in thick fur. Like mammoths, they used their horns to clear snow from vegetation. They were solitary more often than not, moving quietly through the landscape, alert and deliberate. These large herbivores formed the foundation of Ice Age ecosystems. Their movements dictated where predators traveled. Their grazing patterns influenced plant growth. Their bodies provided sustenance for many forms of life, even after death. Predators existed within this balance, not above it. Among the most well-known was the saber-toothed cat. Despite its fearsome reputation, this animal was not built for prolonged pursuit. Its long canine teeth were fragile, requiring careful use. Rather than chasing prey across open ground, saber-toothed cats relied on stealth and precision. They approached quietly, using terrain to conceal their movement. A shallow rise in the land, a bend in a frozen river, a cluster of stones. They waited until distance closed, then struck with controlled force. Energy conservation was critical. A failed hunt could not be easily repeated. Injury meant vulnerability. These predators lived within narrow margins, just like everything else in the Ice Age. Dire wolves moved across the plains in coordinated groups. Larger than many modern wolves, they hunted cooperatively, relying on endurance and teamwork rather than speed alone. Their howls carried across open land, signaling presence and maintaining cohesion within the pack. Wolves followed herds, tracking movements over long distances. They waited for opportunity rather than creating it. Weakness, separation, exhaustion. These moments determined success. Other predators shared the land as well. Short-faced bears, towering and powerful, moved through forests and open areas alike. They were opportunistic, feeding on plants, animals, and carrion. Their size discouraged confrontation, but even they respected the limits imposed by cold and hunger. Smaller predators filled important roles. Arctic foxes darted across snowfields, their coats changing color with the seasons. Wolverines moved through remote areas, solitary and resilient, capable of surviving where few others could. Birds also adapted to this frozen world. Some migrated seasonally, following food sources north and south. Others remained year-round, adjusting behavior to endure long winters. Ravens, crows, and scavenging birds followed herds and predators alike, benefiting from what was left behind. Life during the Ice Age did not exist in isolation. It was woven together. When a large animal fell, its body became a center of activity. Predators fed first. Scavengers followed. Smaller creatures benefited from scraps. Insects appeared during warmer months. Nutrients returned to the soil, supporting plant growth. Nothing was wasted. Even animals that seemed distant from cold played a role. Giant ground sloths, massive and slow-moving, inhabited certain regions, feeding on vegetation and shaping forests. Though often associated with warmer climates, some adapted to cooler conditions, illustrating the diversity of Ice Age environments. Horses roamed grasslands in great numbers. They were well suited to open terrain, moving in herds and relying on speed and awareness to avoid predators. Their grazing habits maintained short grasslands, benefiting other species. Reindeer and caribou traveled in vast seasonal migrations, their hooves designed to move across snow and ice. They followed ancient routes, passed through generations, returning to the same calving grounds year after year. These migrations defined time for many Ice Age animals. Movement signaled change. Arrival and departure marked seasons more clearly than temperature alone. The Ice Age animals did not struggle constantly. Much of their time was spent grazing, resting, and conserving energy. Activity peaked during brief windows when food was available. The rest of the time, stillness dominated. Rest was not weakness. It was survival. Animals sheltered from wind behind ridges, in shallow depressions, or within sparse vegetation. They oriented their bodies to minimize exposure. They moved when necessary and waited when waiting was safer. Young animals learned quickly. Those that failed to adapt rarely survived. Knowledge passed not through teaching, but through instinct and repetition. The cold shaped bodies, but it also shaped behavior. Many animals developed seasonal coats, shedding thick fur during warmer months, and regrowing it as temperatures dropped. Fat reserves built during periods of abundance carried them through scarcity. Reproduction timed itself to maximize survival of offspring. The Ice Age did not forgive miscalculation. Humans observed these animals closely. They learned patterns, migration routes, and behaviors. This knowledge was essential. Animals were not just food sources. They were indicators of environmental change. When herds arrived, early or late, it signaled shifts in climate. When predators altered routes, it suggested changes in prey movement. Humans paid attention because their lives depended on it. There was respect embedded in this relationship. Animals were not seen as endless resources. Overhunting could disrupt balance. Driving herds away meant hardship later. Survival required restraint as much as skill. Many Ice Age animals lived alongside humans for thousands of years. Their coexistence was complex. Humans hunted, but they also followed, waited, and sometimes lost. Extinction did not arrive suddenly for most Ice Age animals. Declines occurred gradually, influenced by changing climates, shrinking habitats, and increased pressure as humans expanded into new regions. Some species adapted, others did not. As the Ice Age warmed, grasslands gave way to forests. Ice retreated. Migration routes disappeared beneath rising seas. Animals that depended on open, cold environments lost the landscapes that sustained them. Mammoths lingered in isolated regions long after ice sheets receded elsewhere. Some populations survived on remote islands, cut off from mainland changes. Their disappearance was slow, quiet, and uneven. When the last mammoths vanished, there was no announcement, no sudden silence. Life continued, reshaped but ongoing. This is important to remember. The Ice Age animals were not symbols of failure. They were participants in a long process of change. Their lives were complete within the world they inhabited. Their bones remained, preserved by cold and time. Their paths left faint traces in the land. Their influence shaped ecosystems long after they were gone. In many ways, humans carry the Ice Age animals with them still. Migration instincts, social cooperation, awareness of seasons. These traits were sharpened through coexistence with creatures who moved in harmony with a demanding world. To imagine the Ice Age animals fully is to imagine a world where life moved deliberately, where size offered warmth, not dominance, where patience mattered more than speed. It was a world without excess. Animals did not consume more than they needed. They did not grow without limit. Their populations rose and fell in response to the land's capacity. This balance was not conscious. It was the result of constraints imposed by cold, time, and energy. As we sit quietly with these animals, watching them move across frozen plains and through pale light, it becomes clear that the Ice Age was not defined by struggle alone. It was defined by adaptation, by lives shaped carefully to fit their world. In the next chapter, we will turn our attention more closely toward the humans who lived among these animals. We will sit beside their fires, observe their movements, and listen to the quiet rhythms of daily survival in a frozen age. For now, it is enough to remember the animals themselves, moving steadily, enduring patiently, living fully within the cold. Early humans did not arrive in the Ice Age world with plans or certainty. They arrived gradually, quietly, one step at a time. They followed familiar paths that had nothing to do with maps, paths shaped by animals, by water, by memory. They moved not because they wished to explore, but because movement was necessary. When resources thinned in one place, they shifted. When seasons changed, they followed. The cold was already there. By the time humans reached the colder regions of the world, the Ice Age had been shaping landscapes and lives for thousands of years. Glaciers moved, grasslands expanded and contracted. Animals migrated along routes older than human memory. Humans entered this system as observers first, learners second, and participants last. They did not dominate the cold, they adapted to it. Early human bodies reflected this slow adjustment. Shorter limbs helped conserve heat. Strong, compact builds reduced surface area exposed to wind. Skin, muscle, and bone worked together to endure long periods of low temperatures and limited food. But biology alone was not enough. Survival in the Ice Age depended on behavior. Fire was central, but it was not taken for granted. Fire had to be protected, carried, and maintained. A flame lost in wind or snow could mean days of difficulty. Embers were preserved carefully. Coals were transported from place to place. Fire was shared within groups, never wasted. Around fire, people gathered, not for comfort alone, but for coordination. Decisions were made quietly. Plans formed slowly. Stories may have been told, but just as often, silence prevailed. Silence conserved energy. Clothing evolved through observation and trial. Early humans used animal hides not as decoration, but as insulation. Fur was worn inward, trapping warmth. Layers were adjusted based on weather and movement. Wet clothing was dangerous. Dryness mattered as much as thickness. Sewing tools appeared early. Simple needles carved from bone or ivory. These allowed clothing to fit closer to the body, reducing heat loss. Loose garments flapped in wind and let cold in. Fitted clothing endured. Shelter followed similar logic. In some regions, caves provided natural protection from wind and cold. In others, temporary structures were built from wood, bone, hide, and snow. These shelters were not permanent homes. They were responses to conditions. A shelter might stand for a season, then be abandoned without regret. The Ice Age did not encourage attachment to place. It encouraged awareness. Daily life was shaped by the need to conserve energy. Movement was deliberate. Tasks were shared. Children learned early to remain close, to watch, to listen. There was no separation between work and survival. Everything done served a purpose: gathering fuel, repairing clothing, sharpening tools, watching the sky. Time moved differently. Without clocks or calendars, early humans measured time by change. The lengthening of daylight. The arrival of animals. The return of certain birds. The feel of wind shifting direction. These signals mattered more than numbers. Food was unpredictable. Hunting required patience, coordination, and restraint. Not every attempt succeeded. Failure was expected and planned for. Groups did not depend on single animals or single events. They diversified. Plants were gathered when available, even in cold climates. Roots, seeds, berries, and hardy vegetation supplemented diets. Knowledge of where these resources appeared was passed quietly from one generation to the next. Nothing was written down. Everything was remembered. Social structures formed around cooperation. Alone, survival was unlikely. Together, it became possible. Groups were small, often extended families or loosely connected bands. Too many people strained resources. Too few increased vulnerability. Balance mattered. Within these groups, roles were flexible. Strength mattered, but so did knowledge. Elders carried memory. Younger members carried energy. Everyone contributed. Children were not separated from daily life. They observed everything: how tools were made, how fires were tended, how animals moved. Learning was constant and subtle. The cold enforced attention. Mistakes were costly. Losing a tool meant effort to replace it. Injury reduced mobility. Carelessness with fire could end a shelter. Awareness became instinct. Yet life was not constant hardship. There were moments of ease, warm days during brief summers, successful hunts that provided abundance, calm nights under clear skies. Laughter likely existed, though quietly. Contentment came not from excess, but from sufficiency. Early humans did not dream of comfort as we define it now. They valued stability, predictability, the ability to endure another season. Movement across Ice Age landscapes followed animals closely. Humans learned migration routes not by choice, but by necessity. Following herds meant access to food, materials, and familiarity. These routes became embedded in memory. Rivers marked boundaries. Mountains guided direction. Certain landmarks held meaning not as symbols, but as reference points. Crossing open land required caution. Wind exposure drained warmth quickly. Travel was timed carefully. Rest stops were chosen for shelter, not convenience. Night travel was limited. Darkness increased risk. Most movement occurred during daylight, even when days were short. The cold affected the mind as much as the body. Long periods of quiet encouraged introspection. Attention turned inward during still moments. Awareness sharpened. Spiritual ideas likely emerged not from abstraction, but from environment. The power of weather, the return of animals, the mystery of life and death in a harsh world. Death was present, but not sensational. It was expected. The cold claimed the weak, the injured, the old. Loss was part of existence, woven into daily life. Burial practices appeared early, suggesting respect and memory. Bodies were placed carefully. Objects were sometimes included. These acts did not prevent death, but they acknowledged it. The Ice Age did not allow illusions of control. Humans could not change the climate. They could not stop winter. They could not command animals to return. They could only respond. This response shaped human psychology. Patience became natural. Long-term thinking emerged not from strategy, but from necessity. Planning ahead was survival. Firewood gathered before it was needed. Clothing repaired before it failed. Food preserved when possible. Everything anticipated scarcity. This mindset did not produce anxiety. It produced rhythm. Repetition created stability. Daily routines anchored life. The same actions performed again and again created familiarity within uncertainty. In many ways, early humans were shaped more by waiting than by action. Waiting for animals. Waiting for weather to change. Waiting for daylight. Waiting for warmth. This waiting was not passive. It was attentive. Listening. Watching. Remembering. Over generations, this way of life became deeply embedded. It shaped how humans related to each other and to the world around them. Cooperation was not idealistic. It was practical. Sharing food increased group survival. Sharing knowledge reduced risk. Caring for injured members preserved experience. The cold rewarded these behaviors. As humans moved farther into Ice Age regions, they did not abandon what they had learned. They refined it. Tools became more specialized, shelters more efficient, clothing more effective. But the core remained the same. Observe, adapt, endure. Humans did not stand apart from the Ice Age. They were shaped by it as surely as mammoths and bison. Their intelligence, flexibility, and social bonds were responses to a world that demanded them. This is important to remember. Early humans were not heroic figures battling nature. They were quiet participants living within it. Their success was not measured in conquest, but in continuity. They lived long enough to pass knowledge forward. They survived long enough to adapt again when the world began to change. In the frozen landscape, early humans found a way not to thrive extravagantly, but to persist. And persistence was enough. In the next chapter, we will look more closely at the relationship between humans and one of the most iconic animals of the Ice Age, the mammoth. Not as myth, not as spectacle, but as a shared presence in a cold and patient world. For now, it is enough to sit with these early humans, moving quietly, thinking carefully, living steadily within the cold. The relationship between humans and mammoths was not simple, and it was never one-sided. It unfolded slowly, shaped by distance, caution, memory, and time. For thousands of years, humans lived alongside mammoths without constant conflict. They shared landscapes. They followed similar paths. They learned one another's rhythms. Mammoths were not always hunted. They were first observed. From afar, early humans watched mammoth herds move across open plains. They learned how the animals traveled, where they paused, and how long they remained in one place. They noticed patterns that repeated year after year. Certain valleys filled with herds during specific seasons. Certain river crossings were used again and again. This knowledge came slowly. It was not gathered in a single lifetime. It accumulated across generations, carried quietly through memory, gesture, and story. Mammoths commanded attention simply by existing. Their size alone made them impossible to ignore. Each step pressed deeply into the ground. Each breath released clouds of vapor into cold air. The sound of a herd moving could be felt before it was clearly heard, a low vibration carried through frozen soil. Humans approached these animals with caution. A mammoth was not prey in the ordinary sense. It was a force of nature. One misstep could mean injury or death. Even a calm mammoth could be dangerous without intention. Respect grew naturally from this reality. When humans did hunt mammoths, it was not impulsive. It required planning, coordination, and restraint. These hunts were rare events, not daily occurrences. The risk was too great, and the reward, though immense, demanded careful consideration. A successful mammoth hunt provided more than food. It offered materials that supported survival for long periods. Meat could be dried or frozen naturally by cold air. Fat provided vital energy. Bones became tools, frames, and anchors. Tusks served as raw material for carving and construction. Hide became shelter and clothing. Nothing was wasted. Nothing could be. Because of this, mammoth hunts were often communal efforts. Entire groups participated, each person contributing according to ability. Some watched the herd's movement. Others prepared tools. Some waited at key locations, ready to respond if conditions aligned. Patience was central to this process. Humans did not chase mammoths across open land. Such an attempt would fail quickly. Instead, they relied on landscape features, natural barriers, soft ground near rivers, steep embankments, frozen surfaces that could be unpredictable under heavy weight. These methods did not rely on strength alone. They relied on understanding. The goal was not to overpower the mammoth, but to guide it, to create conditions where its size became a disadvantage rather than a defense. This required calm coordination and trust among group members. Even then, success was never guaranteed. Often, hunts were abandoned if conditions changed. Wind shifted. The herd altered course. Ice softened. Humans waited rather than forcing an outcome. Walking away preserved lives and energy. This restraint defined the relationship. Mammoths were not viewed as enemies. They were part of the world's structure. Their presence shaped grasslands, opened pathways, and supported other animals. Humans understood this intuitively, if not consciously. Overhunting would disrupt this balance. For long stretches of time, humans likely relied more on smaller animals and gathered resources, turning to mammoths only when circumstances aligned. The rarity of mammoth hunts reinforced their significance. When a mammoth did fall, the moment carried weight. Not celebration in the modern sense, but solemn attention. Work began immediately. Meat had to be processed before it froze too deeply. Tools were passed carefully. Tasks were divided. The group focused. Silence likely dominated these moments. Concentration mattered. This act was not simply about survival. It was about responsibility. Taking a life of such magnitude demanded care. Mistakes meant waste. Waste meant hardship later. In this way, mammoths shaped human behavior even when they were absent. Their potential presence influenced decisions, movement, and planning. Beyond hunting, mammoths served as markers of the land. Herd paths became routes humans followed. Grazing areas indicated where grass would be rich. Trampled snow revealed easier travel paths. Mammoths unintentionally prepared the landscape for others. Humans benefited from this without always being aware of it. There were times when humans and mammoths moved near one another without interaction. Sharing riverbanks, crossing plains at different distances, acknowledging presence without engagement. This coexistence could last generations. Children grew up seeing mammoths as part of the world's background. Not extraordinary, but familiar. Stories likely formed around them, not as legends, but as reference points. A place where mammoths pass in winter. A valley they avoid during thaw. These stories anchored memory. As climates shifted gradually, the relationship began to change. Grasslands slowly transformed. Forests crept into open spaces. Migration routes altered. Mammoths adapted, but their options narrowed. Humans, flexible and mobile, adjusted more easily. This imbalance did not produce immediate conflict, but it increased pressure. Mammoth populations became more isolated. Humans encountered them more frequently in limited spaces. The dynamics shifted subtly. It is important to understand that mammoths did not disappear suddenly everywhere. Their decline was uneven. Some populations vanished earlier. Others persisted long after ice sheets retreated. On isolated islands, mammoths survived thousands of years beyond their mainland relatives. These small populations lived quietly, cut off from broader changes. When they eventually disappeared, it was without witnesses. No single moment marked the end. The question of how much humans contributed to mammoth extinction does not have a simple answer. Climate change reduced suitable habitats. Warming altered vegetation. Rising seas erased migration corridors. Human hunting added pressure. None of these factors acted alone. The relationship between humans and mammoths was long, complex, and variable. In some regions, humans and mammoths coexisted for millennia without apparent decline. In others, changes came more quickly. What remains clear is that this relationship shaped both species. Humans learned cooperation, planning, and patience, partly through engaging with animals larger than themselves. Mammoths influenced landscapes that supported human movement and survival. Their lives were intertwined. Even after mammoths disappeared, their presence lingered. Bones remained in frozen ground. Tusks emerged from eroding riverbanks. These remnants reminded humans of a world that had changed. Mammoths entered memory. They became symbols not of conquest, but of endurance, of a time when humans lived within limits imposed by cold, size, and risk. A time when survival required humility. This humility is often overlooked. Modern interpretations sometimes frame the mammoth as a victim of human expansion. Others portray humans as heroic hunters. Both perspectives miss the quiet reality. For most of their shared history, humans and mammoths simply existed together. They moved across the same land. They responded to the same seasons. They endured the same cold. The end of the mammoth did not feel like an ending to those who lived through it. It was part of a broader shift, a world warming, landscapes changing, new animals appearing, old ones fading. Humans adapted again, as they always had. But something was lost. With the mammoths went the open grasslands they helped maintain. Forests grew denser. New patterns replaced old ones. Human life shifted toward different forms of survival. Agriculture lay far in the future, but the Ice Age world was already receding. Remembering humans and mammoths together is not about assigning blame. It is about recognizing a shared chapter in Earth's history, one defined by patience, restraint, and coexistence. It is about acknowledging that survival once depended on knowing when not to act, when to wait, when to observe, when to walk away. In the frozen world of the Ice Age, humans and mammoths met not as enemies by default, but as participants in the same slow-moving system. They shared the cold. They shared the land. They shared time. And when that time ended, it ended quietly, leaving behind traces in bone, soil, and memory. In the next chapter, we will turn inward again, exploring how Ice Age humans understood life and death, meaning and memory, within a world shaped by cold and uncertainty. For now, let the image settle. A herd moving steadily across frozen plains. Small figures watching from a distance. A world held in balance for a time. Life in the Ice Age moved close to the edge of uncertainty. Cold narrowed choices. Distance stretched effort. Survival depended on attention, restraint, and memory. In such a world, beliefs did not arise from abstraction or speculation. They emerged quietly, shaped by daily experience and the constant presence of change. Early humans did not separate life from meaning. Meaning was embedded in life itself. The cycle of day and night, the return of animals, the coming and going of seasons. These patterns formed a rhythm that guided thought as much as action. When something repeated reliably, it became familiar. When it broke that pattern, it invited reflection. Life was fragile, but not chaotic. Birth occurred within small groups, often during warmer months when movement was easier and food more available. New life was welcomed without ceremony as we might define it, yet it carried significance. A child represented continuity, a reminder that the group would endure beyond a single generation. Infancy was a vulnerable time. Cold, illness, and scarcity posed constant risks. Care was practical rather than sentimental. Warmth, nourishment, and protection mattered more than expression. Those who survived early years became strong through necessity. As children grew, they learned not through instruction alone, but through immersion. They watched elders tend fire, prepare tools, and read the land. Knowledge was absorbed slowly, through repetition and presence. Life was not hurried. Death, however, was never distant. In the Ice Age, death did not arrive dramatically in most cases. It came quietly, through illness that weakened the body, through injuries that did not heal, through age that gradually reduced strength and mobility. Cold did not kill instantly. It wore down resilience over time. When death occurred, it was not treated as an interruption to life, but as part of its structure. Early humans understood that survival did not imply permanence. Everything living eventually ended. What mattered was how that ending was acknowledged. Archaeological evidence suggests that Ice Age humans sometimes buried their dead intentionally. Bodies were placed carefully, often in specific positions. In some cases, tools, ornaments, or natural pigments were included. These acts required effort. Digging frozen ground was not easy. Placing objects meant sacrificing items that could have been used elsewhere. Such decisions suggest that death carried meaning beyond utility. These burials were not uniform. Practices varied across regions and time. Some bodies were placed deep within caves. Others were covered with stone or earth in open areas. Some were accompanied by objects. Others were not. This variation suggests that beliefs were not rigid systems, but flexible responses shaped by circumstance and tradition. Ice Age beliefs were not written or formalized. They were lived. The landscape itself influenced how humans thought about life and death. Ice preserved bodies and bones. Remains could persist for years, visible and unchanged. This preservation blurred boundaries between presence and absence. A body might remain where it fell, recognizable long after life had ended. This visibility made death less abstract. It was part of the environment, not hidden away. Animals, too, shaped these perceptions. Humans observed animals die and decay. They saw scavengers arrive. They watched bones return to the soil. These processes were not mysterious. They were familiar. Yet there was also mystery. Animals appeared and disappeared with the seasons. Herds arrived reliably, then vanished. Predators followed, then moved on. These movements were predictable, but not controllable. Humans learned to accept what they could not change. This acceptance likely shaped early spiritual thought. Rather than seeking to dominate forces beyond control, Ice Age beliefs seem to have focused on coexistence and respect. There is little evidence of gods as rulers or punishers in this period. Instead, meaning may have centered on relationships, between humans and animals, between the living and the dead, between the group and the land. Cave art offers glimpses into this inner world. Paintings and carvings of animals appear in deep caves, far from daily living spaces. These images were not decorations. They required effort, planning, and light. Entering these spaces meant leaving warmth and safety behind. The animals depicted were often those most significant to survival. Mammoths, bison, horses, and deer appear repeatedly. They are shown with care and attention, suggesting familiarity rather than fantasy. Some images overlap or repeat, layered over time. This suggests that these spaces were revisited, returned to, remembered. The act of creating these images may have been as important as the images themselves. Painting required stillness, focus, and cooperation. It slowed time. It drew attention inward. These acts may have served as ways to reflect on life and death without words. Beliefs did not demand certainty. They allowed for ambiguity. Ice Age humans lived in a world where outcomes could not be guaranteed. A hunt might fail. A storm might arrive unexpectedly. An illness might spread. Rather than promising control, beliefs offered continuity. Burial practices and symbolic acts suggest that early humans cared about memory. Remembering the dead preserved connection. It affirmed that individuals mattered beyond their immediate usefulness. This mattered in small groups where every person contributed. Elders, in particular, held significance beyond physical ability. Their value lay in experience. They remembered routes, seasons, and events that others did not. Their deaths marked the loss of knowledge as much as a person. This loss reinforced the importance of sharing memory. Storytelling likely played a role, though not in the form we imagine today. Stories may have been brief, repetitive, tied to specific places or events. They served as anchors for knowledge and identity. A story might explain why a valley was avoided in winter, why a river crossing was dangerous during thaw, why a certain animal was approached with caution. These stories were practical, but they also carried meaning. They linked past to present. They connected individuals to group memory. They reminded listeners that they were part of something larger. Death reinforced these connections. When someone died, routines shifted temporarily. Movement slowed. Attention turned inward. Practical needs still existed, but acknowledgement mattered. Grief was likely quiet. There is little reason to imagine elaborate mourning rituals. Energy was limited. Survival continued. Yet silence itself may have served as recognition. Time was allowed to pass. The Ice Age did not encourage denial of death. It encouraged familiarity with it. Children grew up seeing loss. This did not harden them. It taught acceptance. Life was valued not because it was endless, but because it was temporary. This perspective shaped how humans treated animals as well. Hunting involved taking life, but it was not casual. The effort required made each act significant. Many cultures likely expressed gratitude or recognition after a successful hunt, even if such expressions were subtle. This was not morality as doctrine. It was ethics as necessity. Disrespecting the balance of life risked survival. Ice Age beliefs were not concerned with distant futures or abstract salvation. They focused on continuity, on maintaining harmony within known limits. The idea of an afterlife, if it existed, was likely vague. There is no clear evidence of detailed concepts beyond death. Instead, emphasis appears to have been placed on memory and presence. The dead remained part of the group through remembrance, through objects kept, through stories told. In a world shaped by cold, permanence was rare. Ice preserved some things, but change eventually came. This awareness may have fostered humility. Humans did not see themselves as separate from the forces around them. They were shaped by cold, dependent on animals, vulnerable to weather. Beliefs reflected this position. They did not place themselves at the center of the world. They existed within it. As the Ice Age progressed and climates shifted, beliefs likely adapted as well. New animals appeared. Landscapes changed. Old traditions were adjusted. This flexibility was a strength. Rigid belief systems would not have endured in such conditions. Adaptable ones did. What remains most striking about Ice Age beliefs is their quietness. There is no evidence of grand monuments or dramatic ceremonies. Meaning was expressed through small acts repeated over time. A careful burial, a painted animal, a shared story, a moment of silence. These acts did not seek to explain everything. They acknowledged what could not be explained. Life and death existed together, intertwined. The Ice Age did not allow humans to forget death, but it also did not allow them to dwell on it endlessly. Survival required attention to the present. Beliefs supported this balance. They provided comfort without illusion, structure without rigidity, continuity without certainty. As the Ice Age world slowly began to change, these beliefs would face new challenges. Warmer climates would alter familiar patterns. Old routes would disappear. New uncertainties would emerge. Yet the foundations laid during this frozen age, acceptance, memory, restraint, would continue to shape human thought long after ice retreated. In the next chapter, we will turn our attention to the gradual end of the Ice Age itself, to the slow warming that reshaped the world and altered the balance humans and animals had known for thousands of years. For now, it is enough to sit with this understanding. Life was lived carefully. Death was acknowledged quietly. Meaning was found not in control, but in continuity. And within the cold, that was enough. The end of the Ice Age did not arrive with noise or urgency. There was no moment when the cold simply stopped. It came quietly, carried by subtle shifts that unfolded over generations. A slightly longer summer, a softer edge to winter, snow that melted earlier than expected, revealing ground that had not seen sunlight for centuries. For those living within the Ice Age world, these changes were not immediately understood as an ending. They were noticed as differences, small ones at first, easy to overlook. Time, as it always had, moved slowly. The forces driving this transformation were distant and unseen. Changes in Earth's orbit altered the way sunlight reached the planet. The angle of light shifted. Summers grew stronger. Snow that once lingered began to disappear. Ice responded not with speed, but with patience. Glaciers thinned gradually. Their edges softened. Meltwater traced new paths across the land, forming streams that grew into rivers. Valleys deepened. Low areas filled with water. The frozen world began to loosen its grip. At first, these changes brought opportunity. Warmer temperatures extended growing seasons. Grasses spread into areas once dominated by ice and bare ground. Plants that had survived in sheltered pockets expanded outward, reclaiming territory long held by cold. Animals followed. Herds adjusted migration routes. Some found richer grazing in newly exposed areas. Others encountered obstacles where ice still blocked familiar paths. Movement patterns shifted, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. For humans, the warming world offered relief, but also uncertainty. Longer summers meant more time to gather resources. Travel became easier in some regions. Rivers provided new corridors of movement. Fish appeared in greater numbers. Vegetation diversified. Yet this abundance was uneven. Not all regions warmed at the same pace. Some areas remained cold long after others changed. Weather became less predictable. Sudden cold returns interrupted warming trends, reminding everyone that ice had not fully retreated. This instability required attention. Early humans adapted as they always had, by observing and adjusting. Camps shifted. Seasonal movements changed. Knowledge accumulated again, one observation at a time. But something deeper was happening. As ice sheets melted, sea levels began to rise. Land bridges that had connected continents flooded slowly. Routes humans and animals had used for thousands of years disappeared beneath water. These changes were not visible all at once. The sea advanced quietly, reclaiming low ground inch by inch. A familiar path became marshy. A crossing flooded during high tides. Eventually, the land was gone. Movement was altered permanently. Animals that relied on open grasslands faced increasing pressure. Forests expanded into areas once dominated by steppe tundra. Trees altered soil, moisture, and light. Grazing animals found their food sources shrinking or fragmenting. Mammoths, adapted to open, cold landscapes, struggled as their environment changed. Some populations retreated northward. Others became isolated in pockets where cold conditions lingered. Predators adjusted as well, following prey into new habitats or adapting to different species. This was not a collapse. It was a transformation. The end of the Ice Age was defined not by extinction alone, but by rearrangement. Ecosystems reorganized. Relationships shifted. Balance was renegotiated. For humans, this period demanded flexibility. Knowledge passed down through generations had been shaped by cold and stability. Now, stability was fading. Familiar signals changed meaning. Migration timings shifted. Resources appeared in new places. Humans responded by diversifying their strategies. Some groups continued mobile lifestyles, following animals and seasonal resources. Others began to stay longer in favorable locations. Camps became more frequent at rivers, lakes, and coasts, where resources were reliable. This did not happen suddenly, and it did not happen everywhere. The warming world allowed experimentation. People tested new tools. Fishing technologies improved. Plant gathering became more central in some regions. Storage methods developed slowly, allowing surplus to be saved beyond immediate need. These changes did not replace Ice Age practices overnight. Old ways persisted alongside new ones. Memory did not vanish simply because conditions changed. The cold still returned each winter. Ice still formed. Snow still fell. But it no longer defined everything. The pace of change varied. In some areas, warming was rapid enough to disrupt ecosystems within a few generations. In others, ice lingered for thousands of years, allowing traditional patterns to continue. This unevenness created a patchwork world. Humans living in different regions experienced the end of the Ice Age differently. For some, it felt like opportunity. For others, it felt like loss. For many, it was simply the way the world now behaved. Animals responded according to their limits. Species with flexible diets and behaviors adapted more easily. Those tightly bound to cold environments faced shrinking options. Some migrated. Some dwindled. Some disappeared quietly. There was no single cause. Climate, habitat change, and human activity interacted in complex ways. What mattered most was time. The Ice Age had lasted so long that its rhythms felt permanent. Its end, though gradual, represented a profound shift in how life organized itself. Ice no longer dictated movement everywhere. Cold no longer defined every decision. For early humans, this required rethinking relationships with the land. New plants meant new knowledge. New animals required new strategies. Familiar tools were modified or replaced. Social structures adjusted as resource availability changed. groups that once needed to move constantly could remain longer in one place. This allowed deeper familiarity with local environments. Over time, this familiarity encouraged experimentation with cultivation, though agriculture remained far in the future. The end of the Ice Age did not create modern humans overnight. It created conditions that allowed gradual change. It also altered human perception of time. When survival depends on immediate response to cold, focus remains on the present. As conditions stabilized, planning horizons expanded. Thinking beyond the next season became possible. This shift was subtle but significant. Humans began to imagine continuity in new ways. Settlements lasted longer. Knowledge became more localized. Traditions rooted themselves in specific places rather than movement alone. Yet the memory of ice did not disappear. Stories of cold, of massive animals, of endless plains likely persisted long after those landscapes changed. These memories were carried not as history, but as reference, as reminders of a world that shaped identity. The land itself retained traces. Glacial valleys held lakes, meltwater carved rivers. Erratic stones left behind by ice dotted the landscape. These features became part of daily life, though their origins were not understood. Ice had passed, but it had not been erased. Even as warming continued, occasional returns of cold reminded humans that change was not linear. Climate fluctuated. Dry periods followed wet ones. Cold snaps interrupted warmth. Adaptation remained necessary. The end of the Ice Age did not signal mastery over nature. It reinforced the need for responsiveness. The lesson of the frozen world, observe, adapt, endure, remained relevant. For animals and humans alike, survival depended on recognizing when old patterns no longer worked and new ones were required. Some species succeeded, some did not. Humans, with their capacity for cooperation and learning, carried forward the lessons of the Ice Age into a warming world. They retained patience. They retained memory. They retained restraint. These traits, developed under cold conditions, became strengths in times of change. The end of the Ice Age was not an ending in the way stories often imagine endings. It was a transition between chapters, a slow turning of the page. Ice retreated, but time continued. As glaciers melted and seas rose, the world grew more complex. Environments diversified. Opportunities multiplied. So did challenges. The frozen world that had shaped humanity for tens of thousands of years gradually gave way to something new. But it did so gently. No generation woke to find the Ice Age gone. Each lived within a moment of change, aware only of their own conditions. This is how great transformations occur. Quietly, incrementally, without announcement. In the next chapter, we will look at what the Ice Age left behind, how its long presence shaped landscapes, animals, and human behavior long after the ice itself had melted. For now, rest with this image. Ice thinning under, warming light. Water finding new paths. Life adjusting, as it always has. The Ice Age did not end in silence. It ended in continuity. When the ice withdrew, it did not leave emptiness behind. It left memory. The Ice Age shaped the world for so long that its presence became the foundation upon which everything else rested. Even as temperatures rose and glaciers thinned, the land retained the marks of cold. Valleys carved by ice guided rivers. Stones carried far from their origins rested where glaciers had dropped them. Plains flattened by weight stretched open beneath changing skies. The Ice Age did not vanish. It transformed into inheritance. The most visible legacy was the landscape itself. Great ice sheets had pressed down on continents, reshaping them slowly and thoroughly. When the ice melted, the land rebounded unevenly. Some areas rose, others sank. Coastlines shifted again, this time inward, as rising seas reclaimed ground. Lakes appeared where ice had carved deep basins. Many of the world's freshwater lakes exist because glaciers once stood there. These waters became new centers of life, supporting plants, animals, and eventually human settlement. Rivers followed paths etched by meltwater. Their courses felt natural, but they were guided by ancient ice. Floodplains formed where glaciers once paused. Fertile soil accumulated, built from fine sediments ground down by frozen movement. The Ice Age left behind a land prepared for complexity. Forests spread into regions once dominated by tundra and grassland. Trees altered soil composition. Shade changed temperature patterns. Moisture lingered longer. New ecosystems emerged, layered and interconnected. Animals responded in different ways. Some species that had thrived in open, cold environments faded as forests expanded. Others adapted, finding niches within changing landscapes. Smaller animals diversified. Birds expanded their ranges. Insects multiplied in warmer conditions. This shift toward diversity marked a turning point. Where the Ice Age favored size and insulation, the post-Ice Age world favored flexibility. Animals, with varied diets and behaviors, found opportunity. Specialists faced limits. Humans were among the most adaptable. The Ice Age had trained humans to observe, remember, and adjust. These skills did not disappear when the climate warmed. They became tools for navigating a more complex world. As environments diversified, so did human strategies. People learned new seasonal patterns. Fishing became more reliable as rivers and lakes stabilized. Coastal resources emerged as shorelines formed. Shellfish, fish, and marine mammals offered new forms of sustenance. Plant gathering expanded. With longer growing seasons, more species became available. Knowledge of plants deepened. People learned which could be eaten, stored, or processed. These changes did not erase old practices. Hunting remained important. Mobility continued, but new options reduced dependence on a single resource. The Ice Age left behind flexibility as a survival trait. Tools reflected this inheritance. Stone tools, developed during the Ice Age, were refined, not abandoned. Techniques learned for shaping durable implements were applied to new needs. Blades became more specialized. Tools diversified alongside environments. Bone, wood, and plant fibers gained importance. With greater material availability, humans experimented more freely. Innovation became incremental, built on Ice Age foundations. Shelter changed as well. Temporary camps remained common, but some locations became favored repeatedly. Proximity to water, reliable food sources, and favorable terrain encouraged longer stays. Structures grew slightly more substantial, though permanence was still rare. This shift toward repeated use of specific places marked an important transition. It suggested familiarity not just with movement, but with locality. Memory became anchored to place. Social structures evolved in response. With more predictable resources, group sizes could increase slightly. Interactions between groups became more frequent. Exchange of materials and knowledge expanded. Trade routes emerged along rivers and coastlines. These routes often followed paths shaped long ago by ice and water. The Ice Age had created corridors. Humans filled them. Beliefs also carried Ice Age influence. The respect for balance learned during cold conditions did not vanish. Awareness of limits remained. The understanding that resources could disappear shaped attitudes toward sharing and restraint. Even as abundance increased, memory of scarcity persisted. Stories of cold, of great animals, of vast plains likely survived long after those realities faded. These stories did not function as history. They functioned as grounding, reminders of what endurance looked like. The Ice Age became a reference point, not consciously remembered as a period, but felt as inherited caution, as patience embedded in behavior, as an instinct to plan ahead. This inheritance shaped how humans responded to new challenges. When environments changed again, through droughts, floods, or cold returns, humans drew on Ice Age lessons. They adjusted rather than resisted. They moved rather than clung. They shared rather than hoarded. The Ice Age had taught adaptability through repetition. Animals, too, carried Ice Age legacies. Migration patterns established during cold periods continued to influence movement long after warming. Some routes persisted, even when original reasons faded. These paths became traditions encoded in instinct. Certain physical traits remained. Thick coats thinned, but insulation did not disappear entirely. Body proportions shifted gradually. Evolution continued, guided by new pressures layered atop old ones. Even species that vanished left influence behind. The disappearance of large grazers altered vegetation patterns. Forests grew denser without their constant movement. This changed fire dynamics, soil composition, and plant diversity. The absence of mammoths reshaped ecosystems, just as their presence once had. Humans adapted to these new conditions, but the transition was gradual. Change unfolded across generations, not lifetimes. This slow pace allowed continuity. One of the most profound legacies of the Ice Age was how it shaped human perception of time. Living within long, stable cold phases trained humans to think in seasons and generations rather than moments. Even as environments became more dynamic, this long view remained. Planning extended beyond immediate survival. People considered next year, the next cycle, the next generation. This mindset laid groundwork for later developments. Agriculture, when it eventually emerged, relied on patience, observation, and long-term planning, traits refined during the Ice Age. Domestication required restraint. Cultivation required memory. These were not sudden inventions. They were extensions of Ice Age thinking. The Ice Age also left behind physical reminders embedded in daily life. Mountains shaped by glaciers defined horizons. Rivers carved by meltwater guided travel. Soils enriched by glacial deposits supported plant growth. Humans lived within landscapes built by ice, even when they no longer recognized its role. In this way, the Ice Age remained present without being named. It shaped where people settled. It shaped how they moved. It shaped what they valued. The world after the Ice Age was more complex, but it was built upon simplicity learned under constraint. Cold had stripped life down to essentials. Warmth allowed complexity to grow back. Yet the core lessons remained. Do not waste. Do not rush. Pay attention. These principles, learned through necessity, continued to guide behavior even when necessity softened. The Ice Age also left behind a sense of humility. Having lived in a world where climate dictated everything, humans did not assume control easily. Nature was not something to dominate. It was something to respond to. This attitude persisted for a long time. Only much later, with technological advances and accumulated surplus, would humans begin to imagine themselves apart from environmental limits. Even then, echoes of Ice Age humility remained in stories, rituals, and traditions. The Ice Age did not leave behind monuments. It left behind habits, habits of cooperation, habits of foresight, habits of adaptation. These habits proved durable. As humans spread into new regions, they carried Ice Age knowledge with them. They adapted it to forests, coasts, and deserts, but the foundation remained. Observe first. Act carefully. Plan ahead. The Ice Age was not remembered as a golden age or a catastrophe. It was remembered, if at all, as background, as a shaping force rather than a defining event. This quiet influence is its greatest legacy. By shaping the conditions under which humans learned to live, the Ice Age shaped humanity itself. Intelligence, cooperation, and cultural continuity were sharpened not by abundance, but by constraint. The world that followed was richer and more varied, but it was made possible by endurance forged in cold. As ice retreated and landscapes transformed, humans carried forward the memory of how to live within limits. This memory did not disappear. It adapted. Even now, long removed from glaciers and mammoths, traces of that inheritance remain. In patience, in planning, in the quiet understanding that change is constant and adaptation is necessary. The Ice Age left behind more than valleys and lakes. It left behind a way of being. In the final chapter, we will reflect on why this long frozen period mattered so deeply, and how its slow rhythms marked the end of one world and the beginning of another. For now, let the thought settle. Ice passed. Life continued. Memory remained, and through that memory, the Ice Age still speaks. As the world slowly warmed and the ice withdrew, there was no clear moment when the Ice Age became the past. No boundary marked its end. No signal announced that a chapter had closed. Life simply continued. The frozen plains softened. Rivers widened. Forests spread where grass once ruled. Animals adjusted or faded or found new places to endure. Humans moved forward as they always had, watching, adapting, remembering. And yet, something profound had already been written into them. For tens of thousands of years, the Ice Age shaped how life learned to exist. It taught patience through long winters. It taught restraint through scarcity. It taught cooperation through necessity. These lessons were not recorded in words or symbols. They were carried in habits, instincts, and shared memory. When ice no longer dominated the land, those lessons did not disappear. Humans had learned how to wait. They had learned how to notice small changes and respond without panic. They had learned that survival did not come from force alone, but from understanding rhythm, of seasons, of animals, of land itself. These lessons mattered more than tools or techniques. The Ice Age asked very little of life, but it demanded consistency. It offered no shortcuts, no guarantees, only time. And time shaped everything. Early humans did not know they were living through a defining era. They did not know that mammoths would one day vanish, or that forests would replace open plains. They did not know that rivers would rise, or that coastlines would change. They knew only what they could see, feel, and remember. That knowledge was enough. As the Ice Age world faded, its influence remained embedded in human behavior. Movement became choice rather than necessity. Waiting became strategy rather than survival. Memory became history rather than instinct. But the foundation remained. The patience learned in cold seasons made room for planning. The cooperation forged in scarcity allowed larger communities to form. The humility shaped by uncontrollable climates tempered human ambition for a long time. The Ice Age did not end humanity's struggle with uncertainty. It taught humanity how to live with it. This is perhaps its quietest and most enduring legacy. In modern life, the Ice Age can feel impossibly distant. Its animals appear strange, its landscapes unfamiliar, its pace almost unimaginable. Yet the core of what it shaped still echoes beneath everything that followed. The ability to endure change, the capacity to adapt rather than resist, the understanding that stability is temporary. These truths were learned slowly, under ice and wind, through countless ordinary days. The Ice Age did not produce heroes as stories often imagine them. It produced continuity. It allowed life to persist long enough to change again. That persistence is worth remembering. Not because the Ice Age was harsh or dramatic, but because it was steady. Because it showed that survival does not always require conquest or control. Sometimes it requires patience. Sometimes it requires listening. Sometimes it requires waiting for the world to change on its own terms. As you rest now, imagine that older world one last time. A wide, open landscape under pale light, animals moving quietly across frozen ground, small human figures tending a fire, sharing warmth, waiting for morning. No urgency, no noise, only presence. That world is gone, but it is not lost. It remains in the shape of the land, in the paths rivers follow, in the instincts carried forward through generations. It remains in the understanding that life has always moved through change, not away from it. The Ice Age was not a mistake of nature. It was not a failure of climate. It was one phase in a long, patient story. A chapter written slowly, without spectacle, yet with lasting influence. When ice melted, life did not reset. It evolved forward, carrying what it had learned, and so did we. If there is comfort to be found in this long history, it lies in knowing that change has always been part of the human experience, that adaptation is not new, that patience has carried life through far colder and quieter worlds than our own. The Ice Age reminds us that time does not rush, that endings are often beginnings seen from a distance, that survival can be gentle. As this story comes to rest, there is nothing left to hold on to, no lesson to memorize, no conclusion to reach, only a sense of continuity. The ice receded, the world warmed, life continued, and now you can rest within that same quiet rhythm. Let the cold fade into memory, let the movement slow, let time pass gently once more. The story is complete.